One of my viewers asked me a question. They said to me, Pete, can you do a video of modern watches versus vintage ones? You know, the pros and the cons, and more likely, which vintage watches should we collect? And today, guys, we're going to touch on that topic. I've got a few watches here on the channel that I want to show you. It doesn't matter the brand, whether they're Seiko, Rolex, Omega. We're going to speak about this today. Let's run the intro. Let's check it out. Welcome back to the channel, guys. So as you can see here, we have some vintage watches as well as a modern one here on the table. We've got a 1968 Seiko Matic. It's a 37mm, quite nice, very petite. We have a Seiko Bullhead from 1976, a really nice watch. I love this watch. I wear it basically weekly, sometimes monthly, but yeah, it's definitely in the collection for a reason. A Pepsi Diver from 1984, again a Seiko, and a Seiko Samurai 2019. So these watches, what I want to speak about is the pros and the cons of collecting vintage watches as compared to modern watches. So I'm going to go straight to the cons, guys, because I think it's important to really understand what you're getting into when you buy older watches. And it doesn't matter if it's a Seiko, if it's an Omega, if it's a Rolex, it's a Jaeger LeCoultre, if it's a Patek Philippe. It does not matter what watch it is. If it's of any value to you personally, be careful, because there's a lot of cons and there's a lot of pros. So let's get straight into it. First and foremost, the first con that I can see, or the first negative that I can see with buying vintage watches, is bracelets. The bracelets of all of the watches that you're going to find from, you know, back in the 70s, 60s, 50s, they're not that good. And, you know, they're basically flimsy, they're uncomfortable, they're a little bit rattly, the micro adjustments on it are so-so. But yeah, it's one thing to bear in mind. Don't expect a really comfortable experience. Even though they look good, even though they're designed beautifully, don't expect a comfortable experience from a vintage bracelet. It's not going to happen. So, you know, I don't recommend you throw it out. Obviously, it's you know, part of the era. So, you know, maybe put them aside, replace the actual bracelet with something more modern. So, number one, the bracelet. Second thing I think we need to address when it comes to watches and the cons of buying vintage watches is butchered watches. And when I say butchered watches, just be careful how much the watch has been used. It's condition. Yeah, you really got to be careful. You got to know what you're getting into, guys. There's watches that if you don't do your research, you might grab a watch thinking you're getting a particular type of watch, and when you get it in your hands and you take it to your watchmaker and he starts having a look at it, he says, hang on, these aren't original hands, or the dial's been changed, or the movement is not original. There's parts that have been changed in the watch, and you've basically spent some decent money on something you thought was, you know, a classic or an original, and it's not. So that's something to do your homework, do your own research. There's plenty of you know, plenty of online help with particular models. So search up the model, have a look, see what you should be looking for, pluses and minuses, and say, okay, I better be careful of this, better be aware of that. So butchered watches, be very, very careful. Number three, vintage watches are very delicate items. The movements, the crowns, the parts in these were designed a little bit differently back in the 60s and 70s as compared to the modern day stuff, which is very, very strong. So that's one thing to keep an eye out on, guys, is there's the delicate movements. If something goes wrong, you need to consider all these things, you know. So don't treat the watch, a vintage watch, the same way as you would a modern counterpart. It's really simple. It's really simple, and that's something that comes from experience. Sometimes we get so used to using the modern stuff that as soon as you buy a vintage, oh great, you start to use it the same way, and something breaks. You know, something breaks. Especially watches from the 50s or the 40s. Just be careful. You know, especially if you're outlaying good money for these things. So, number three, delicate items. Speaking of delicate items, number four, service cost. You know, if you need parts, if you buy a watch and you need parts to get replaced in that actual watch, are they available today? That's something really to consider. You know, it might not be that critical in, you know, lower end vintage watches, stuff like this, and I consider this stuff lower end. There's nothing really exceptional about them, but when you start outlaying big money, big bucks on some name brands, that's something that you really need to consider. Are there availability of parts if the watch is faulty or if something goes wrong? Number 4, service cost. Number 5, the loom. The loom on the watches, when you're buying a vintage watch or a vintage diver, guys, honestly, don't expect to get the loom that you're going to get from today's modern counterparts. You're really not. And I mean, look, that's a given, but there's also what's called loom degradation. In a lot of watches, the loom, depending on the type of loom that these watches used, it's disintegrated or it's basically corroded away. So when looking at buying a particular watch, bear in mind that the loom itself, if it is a diver or something along those lines, keep an eye out on how the condition of that is. And with the Seiko Willard, for an example, the Seiko 6105-8110, that particular watch, the loom that was used in that watch, when it comes in contact with moisture, it starts to go black. So that's a condition to look for in a particular model, and that comes from research, guys. That comes from you guys doing your own homework. So again, it comes down to personal homework. If you like a particular type of watch, research that watch, find the ins, the outs, and then put some money down. Don't just find something on eBay or a watch, buy sell forum and say, oh look, he's got one of these watches. He's asking $500 for, 800 bucks. I'll grab it. Know what you're buying. Know what you're buying first. So number 6, deceivers. You might want to, you might want to purchase a watch on a buy sell forum, like I said, and there's certain things that I see when I buy watches. And again, where do you buy watches? You can go to Chrono24, you can go to eBay, you can go to Facebook forums, you can go to shops, retail. I think going to a shop, a second-hand dealer, you've got some reassurance that you're getting what you're getting. You ask the questions. You're obviously going to pay a little bit more of a premium, but at least you're going to get something. That it's pretty much what you're paying for. So there's a lot of that's a lot of comfort in doing something like that, because you're not dealing blind. But with deceivers, I've seen so many ads, guys, where someone advertises a watch and they say to you, look, in the description, look, it stopped working this week. The watch has been great. I've been wearing it. It stopped working this week. I couldn't be bothered servicing, or going down that road. So I decided to sell it, at a good price. And you think this is a great deal, but when the watch arrives and you open it up, you might open the case back and you see that there's corrosion, there's irreversible damage, the movement's shot, or how could this have been working when this thing's destroyed internally? So there's a lot of lying going on, a lot of deception. You've just got to be careful, guys. Do your homework, ask all the questions before the money goes down. Ask them to open up the case back. Show me a photo. Show me a photo. And that's, just safeguarding yourself, as well as make sure that where you purchase the watch, there's a refund policy. Safeguard yourself. There's PayPal involved or something where you can get your money back just in case you stuff up. Number 7, when it comes to vintage watches, many of these things are unrealistic dailies. They really are, guys. They're unrealistic dailies. I wear this on a weekly basis, and it works. It's strong. This particular one's got a very strong, robust movement in it. No problems. But when you come to more delicate watches that have more delicate movements in them from the vintage era, you really can't wear them on a daily basis. Not in today's generation with the lifestyles that we lead, because they won't last, or if you do go through a knock or a bump, and you've just got to keep that in mind, especially if it's a vintage rare watch. It all comes down to what you're collecting it for. Are you collecting a watch to put it aside so it can appreciate in value? Sure, that's great. You won't be wearing it, but if you're wearing it to use as a daily, make sure that you're wearing something that's reasonable, that's not going to surprise you, for a better word, that, oh my goodness, why did this break? Well, it's not that strong. You can't go swimming and scuba diving and surfing with something like this. Be real. Even with something like this, this was designed for 150 meters of it's a 150 meter diver back in 1984. but the seals on this are probably shot by now. Yeah, definitely, this will need a service. The seals are gone. I wouldn't trust this in the water. I wouldn't go swimming with this. I'd have to get the crown seals replaced, the gasket on the actual glass, the hardlex itself, as well as the rear seal. So, but that's not what I bought this watch for. I didn't buy it to go swimming. It's a vintage watch from a particular era which I liked. I'll go swimming with this. That's why I bought this. This is more current. This is 2019. In fact, this is my summer swimming watch. That's what I use. So look, I can go on and on with cons, guys. There's so many things like I said, waterproofness, hackability. Can you hack a watch? Yeah. Do you have to wind it like this? Old movements that didn't feature hackability. Quick set date. Do they offer quick set date? So there's a lot of things to consider. But my suggestion is do your homework of what you're getting into and why you want it, what's the purpose you want it. But let's put that aside. Let's get on to the pros. Let's get on to why we should basically collect vintage watches, or at least have one, maybe two in your collection. And the first pro that I can see is nostalgia. The nostalgia of actually owning an original. Not getting a copy, not getting I won't name brands of knockoffs these days, but there's so many knockoffs. They call them homages. They're not homages. They're just plain, blatant knockoffs of a watch without the registered name, without the company's knockoff, the knockoff company's name on there. It just feels special when you got the real thing. This thing's from 1976. This thing's ideal, guys. You put it on your wrist. You're walking around and you're thinking, you know what, I've got a fantastic watch here. I've got a watch that I love. It's from the 70s. No one can tell you anything different. No one can tell you anything different. You know what you've got. You know how you feel. It's real. It's real. So number one, nostalgia of owning the real thing. Number two pro of getting a vintage watch, value. It comes down to this, guys. These watches are appreciating in value immensely. As time goes by, it's a natural thing. It's the way of things, and it's normal. It really is normal. I'll give an example. I could have bought a watch like this probably 6-7 years ago for approximately $250, $300. I've seen these. They're basically getting listed at $1,000+ today. It's just a bullhead. It was released in quantity, but you know what? Try finding someone in decent condition. They're going for an arm and a leg. Rolexes, vintage 1960s, 1950s Rolexes, they're going up in value. Everything vintage is going up in value for the reason you can't get them anymore. They're not making them anymore. So that's where the draw card and the attraction is. And the rarer the watch, the more money it's going to appreciate. The rarer the watch, the more money. And a friend of mine purchased a Paul Newman Daytona. He paid $70,000 or $75,000 for it several years ago. Just to give you an example, he held it for several years, used it, he sold it for 150 grand. He doubled up in several years' time. That same gentleman that bought the watch sold it a few years later for just under $300,000. That's big money. That's huge money. Now, I just want to stress, imagine you're the guy who paid 150 grand for that watch, and the watch is not fully original. The watch is not, like we spoke in the cons, it's got replacement parts or this or that. It's not worth 150. Especially a model of that caliber, it's not worth that money. So just be careful, guys. The value is appreciating, but yeah, it only appreciates if the watch is fully original and obviously dependent upon condition. Okay. Speaking of that, number 3 pro of buying these watches, you stand out in the crowd. You really do. You walk around with a watch from 1984 and people look at it. It's got its patina, it's got its battle scars, the little marks here and there. It looks great. It really does. The modern stuff that's coming out today has a particular type of look. The modern watches have a particular, same pedigree, same look, same style, with same genes. Obviously it's the same company, right, as you can see here, but modern to vintage. You can see the difference here. This one here is the technology they used to use back in the 70s. Obviously from their bi-directional bezels. This particular one here, I've actually, it doesn't have the bezel. Sorry guys, I've removed the bezel and put a fixed one because I've modified it. But again, this was a unidirectional on this particular one. Luminosity, just the cleanness of the new divers as compared to the vintage. It's nice. It's just got a particular look that we like, a particular look that we go for. And Everyone's got a different taste. For me, I like this particular Pepsi. It's not too old, it's not too tattered, it wears well. So there you go. Number four pro of actually collecting vintage watches: condition. And when I say condition, look, make sure that when you do get, if you're collecting for the sake of, you know, you're going to be spending money on a watch, make sure that the condition of the watch is good. Just be careful, guys. Just be careful. You know, you really have to know what you're looking for by doing your own homework. So condition is key. Condition is key. If you do buy watches that are vintage, that are in good condition, you're already on the right track. If you buy something that needs a lot of work, a lot of input, polishing, servicing, crystal replacements, all the rest, you're basically opening up a rabbit hole. So guys, there's positives, there's negatives. You know, for me, what am I saying? Should we not buy vintage? I think we should. I think there's a nostalgic feel, a reality of stuff that, you know, our history, where it started from. It's great. It really is, guys. There's a feeling that the older stuff gives you that you can't get from certain modern watches. So you can't get from a knockoff either. You just can't. For me personally, guys, if you can't afford to get an original of something, don't get it. Don't get it, really don't get it. Just save your money, yeah, save a few more bucks. And if you don't find one that's in great condition, don't get it. Yeah, be patient. And this hobby is about patience. It's about spending time, doing the research, learning, watching YouTube videos, reading articles, forums. If you're really keen about getting the real deal, you'll get the real deal. You just got to be patient. So, but I think if you stay away from trash, you know, watches that look like they've been run over by the bus, the case back's been opened by a dodgy can opener, just avoid them altogether. You're asking for trouble. You really are. So apart from that, do your own research, and if you invest wisely. Thank you for watching, guys.